My father slid a manila folder across my dead grandmother's dining table and told me to be reasonable. 7 years I had lived in that house as her hands, her driver, her night nurse, her memory, and I was never paid $1 for a single day of it. Inside that folder was the reason. The house I had been promised was already gone, signed away on a date when my grandmother could not physically have signed anything, because I had been sitting beside her hospital bed, watching her sleep. Here is what my father didn't know that morning. Today, I read land records for a living. I examine deeds. I find the lie buried in the paperwork, and I get paid to prove it. And last year, I took the one document my family built their whole story on, and I had it erased from the face of the earth. Legally, quietly, and in front of a judge. My name is Marnie. I am 39 years old. And if you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who gave up the years while everybody else gave up nothing, then this story is going to feel like it happened to you. Welcome back. And if you are new here, this channel is where quiet people finally get loud in the only language that counts. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and stay with me, because the ending of this one is not a shout, it is a stamp. A county clerk's stamp, landing on a page. At 10:40 in the morning, let me take you back to where it started. Because the morning I walked out of that dining room, the morning with the folder, that morning is the hinge this whole story swings on. Everything I am about to tell you happened, either before that morning, or after it. Keep that morning in your mind. I'll keep you anchored to it the whole way. 7 years before that morning, my phone lit up at 6:15 in the evening with my father's name, while I was standing in the frozen aisle of a grocery store in Columbus, Ohio. His voice had the tone he saved for announcements, the tone that told you the decision had already been made, and your part was to receive it. He said, "Your grandmother fell, broke her wrist. Somebody has to move in with her, and Dean has the kids, and your mother's back won't allow it. You are the one without obligations. The one without obligations." I was 32. I had a rented apartment I liked, a job as a records clerk at the county offices, a Saturday hiking group, and a man named, well, he doesn't get a name in this story, because he was gone within the year. And honestly, I understand why. But in my father's arithmetic, none of that added up to a life. A life was a marriage and children. I had neither. So I had nothing. So I had room. And here is the part I want you to hear clearly, because it is the part I got wrong for years. I didn't move into my grandmother's house because my father ordered me to. I moved in because I loved her. Her name was Ruth. She was 81 that year, sharp as a paper's edge. And she was the only person in my family who had ever looked at me like I was the interesting one. When I was a kid, she taught me to read upside down off her crossword. She kept a dented blue tin on her counter, older than my father, full of recipe cards in her slanted handwriting. And when I was 9, she told me that tin was the only thing in the house worth stealing. Remember, the blue tin, it is going to matter more than the house does. So, I gave up the apartment. I moved into the back bedroom of the house on Larkspur Lane, the house my grandfather had paid off decades earlier. The house with the porch light Ruth kept burning every single night. She had her reasons for that light. She told me once, "A lit porch tells the street, somebody's still keeping this place." I took over the light, the way I took over everything else. Quietly, one duty at a time, until the whole house ran through my hands. At first, it was a broken wrist. Then it was rides to the doctor. Then it was her medications, sorted into a plastic tray with the days of the week on it. Then, it was the checkbook, because the numbers had started swimming on her. Then, in the 3rd year, it was the word no family ever wants to hear a doctor say out loud. The slow kind of forgetting that takes a person one room at a time. I became her healthcare proxy. That is the person a patient legally chooses to speak for them when they can't speak for themselves. She chose me at her kitchen table, with her own lawyer sitting across from us, on an ordinary Tuesday. She was still sharp enough then to make jokes about it. She said, "Marnie gets the deciding vote, because Marnie's the only one who shows up to vote." Her own lawyer heard her say that. Hold on to that detail, too. Now, I want to be honest with you about what those years cost, because this genre loves to skip the middle, and the middle is where I lived. Around the clock care for an aging parent runs about $6,000 a month, where we live. That is the going rate if you hire it out. I did it for 7 years. That is 84 months, $504,000 of care, given for free, $500,000. That is not a favor. That is a paid-off house. That is an entire retirement, handed over one load of laundry at a time. And I never asked for a dime, because every time money came anywhere near the conversation, my father had a phrase he used like a door closing. He'd say it with a little smile, like he was quoting scripture. "Family doesn't keep receipts, Marnie." He said it when I mentioned the cost of her new medications. He said it when I asked whether Dean might cover the furnace repair. He said it the year I couldn't afford to fix my own car, because I'd spent my savings on a stairlift. Family doesn't keep receipts. Write that phrase down somewhere in your mind, because at the end of this story, I'm going to hand it back to him. And when I do, it is going to mean something else entirely. Let me show you what the pattern looked like, because a pattern is just cruelty with a schedule. 6 years before that morning, my brother Dean visited twice, in an entire year, and he lived 90 minutes away. Both times he came with his kids, stayed for exactly one meal, took pictures of himself holding Ruth's hand, and posted them with captions about how much family meant to him. My mother would call me afterward, glowing. Wasn't it wonderful of Dean to make the drive? 90 minutes. I hadn't left the property overnight in 14 months, and Dean got a parade for a pot roast. If you've ever watched somebody get a standing ovation for doing 1% of what you do in silence, you know exactly the taste that leaves in your mouth. You don't say anything. You just swallow it. That is what I did. I swallowed it for years. 5 years before that morning, it was Thanksgiving, and my parents arrived with a plan they announced as a favor. Ruth's car, a clean, low-mileage sedan she could no longer drive, was going to Dean. "It is just sitting there," my father said, carving the turkey I had cooked, in the kitchen I had cleaned, in the house I ran. "Dean's got a family to haul around. It is what Mom would want." Ruth was at the table. Nobody asked her. I watched her eyes travel from face to face, tracking the shape of the conversation, even as the words got away from her. And I watched her understand, in whatever way she still could, that decisions about her things were now being made in the third person while she sat in the room. That night, after everyone left, she stood at the counter with her hand resting on the blue tin, the way you'd rest a hand on a dog's head. She didn't say anything about the car. She said, "They think the valuables are in the driveway." Then she tapped the tin twice and went to bed. I thought it was a joke. I laughed. Remember that I laughed. Stay with me now, because this next part is the seed the whole ending grows from, and I need you to see it the way I saw it. Which is to say, almost not at all. 3 years before that morning, in the second week of March, Ruth had a small stroke. Small is the doctor's word. There is nothing small about watching the person you love try to find her own name and miss. She was admitted to the hospital on March 12th, and discharged on March 18th. 6 days. I know those dates the way you know your own birthday, because I lived them in a vinyl chair beside her bed, going home only to shower and turn on the porch light. Because a lit porch tells the street somebody's still keeping the place. My father visited the hospital exactly once that week. He came on the 14th, a Thursday, in the early afternoon. And here is the detail I half noticed and filed away in the drawer of my mind where you put things that itch. He didn't come to the room first. I saw him through the interior window, down the corridor, standing by the elevators with Dean. And my father had a folder under his arm, a plain manila folder. They talked for a while, heads close. Then Dean left without ever coming to see his grandmother, and my father came in, sat for 10 minutes, said the room smelled like a hospital, and went home. I remember thinking, that is odd. Dean drove all this way and didn't come in. And then Ruth stirred and needed water, and the thought went into the drawer, and the drawer closed. That folder matters later. That Thursday matters later. March 14th. Keep it. Ruth came home on the 18th, thinner and quieter, and the house got harder. I am going to compress the next stretch. Not because it didn't matter, but because you already know what it looked like. It looked like alarms at 3 a.m. It looked like learning to cook. Everything soft. It looked like her calling me by her dead sister's name and me answering to it, because correcting her only frightened her. And my job was not to be right. My job was to keep her world warm. 1 year before that morning, we had the last real conversation I ever got. It was late September, warm enough to sit out, and I had wheeled her onto the porch at dusk. The light was on above us. She was having one of those clear evenings that the disease hands you like a cruel gift, and she looked at the yard for a long time. And then she said, "This house knows who kept it warm." I said something light, the way you deflect when your throat is closing. And she reached over, took my wrist with more strength than she'd shown in months, and said, "I put it in writing, Marnie, years ago, with my own lawyer. Don't let anybody tell you different." I said, "Okay, Grandma." I didn't press her. You don't cross-examine a dying woman on her porch. But I noticed she didn't say, "I am leaving you the house." She said, "I put it in writing," as if the writing itself was the point. As if she already knew the fight would not be about what she wanted, but about what could be proven. She knew her family. You see, she'd had 80+ years to study them. Ruth died in her own bed, in the house on Larkspur Lane, on a Tuesday in early spring, 2 weeks after her 88th birthday. I was holding her hand. The last thing I did for her, before I called anyone, was walk downstairs and turn on the porch light. Even though it was 2 in the afternoon, it felt like the correct paperwork for a soul. I did not cry at the funeral. I want you to know that, and I want you to understand it, because people read tearlessness as coldness, and it is usually the opposite. I had done my grieving in installments for 7 years, one lost room at a time. The funeral was for the people who showed up at the end. Dean gave a eulogy about Sunday dinners he had attended maybe 6 of. My mother wore the brooch she'd taken off Ruth's dresser. Without asking, my father shook hands at the door, like a man at his own retirement party. And 3 days later came the morning. The morning this whole story hangs on. My father called it a family meeting. 10 a.m. at my parents' house, around their dining table, which should have been my first clue. Not the lawyer's office, not Ruth's kitchen, his table, his territory. When I arrived, the coffee was already poured, and Dean was already seated, and there was a manila folder squared up in front of my father's chair, like a place setting. I recognized the folder. Not that folder specifically. A folder is a folder, but the shape of the ritual. the elevator, corridor. The 14th of March. The drawer in my mind slid open. Half an inch. I told it to hush. I sat down. My father cleared his throat and did what he called walking us through it. And I am going to slow down here, because I promised you the details. And the details are the whole crime, he said. Ruth's estate was simple. Some savings, split between the grandchildren. The furniture, to be divided sensibly. My mother would take the jewelry for safekeeping. That was the phrase. For safekeeping, for jewelry that never came back. And the house, he said. And here he did something I will never forget. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn, like he was screwing down a lid. The house, he said, wasn't part of the estate at all. I heard the words, but they refused to become meaning. I said, "What do you mean it is not part of the estate? It was her house." "It was," my father said. "She transferred it to Dean years ago. It is done, it is recorded, it is legal." He opened the folder, took out a single page, and slid it across the table to me. "You can see for yourself. Don't make this a thing, Marnie." The page was a photocopy of a deed, one page, and I want to pause and tell you what kind, because the kind matters. It was a quitclaim deed. That is the fastest, barest way there is to hand property to someone. No sale, no title search, no bank, no questions. One page that says, "Whatever I own of this place, I give to you." The paper equivalent of tossing someone your keys. It said Ruth had transferred the house on Larkspur Lane to Dean for the sum of $10, plus, quote, "love and affection," which is the legal way of saying, for free. At the bottom was a signature that was shaped like my grandmother's, and next to it was a notary's stamp. A notary, in case you've never needed one, is a person licensed by the state whose entire job is to witness, in person, that the signer is the signer. That stamp exists to prove one thing only, that Ruth herself stood in front of this licensed witness, alive and willing, on the date written beside it. And then I read the date beside it, March 14th, 3 years earlier. The corridor, the elevators, the folder under my father's arm, Dean leaving, without seeing her. My grandmother asleep in a hospital bed with a line in her arm while I watched her breathe. On the exact calendar day, this stamp swore she was standing in front of a notary, signing away her house. Something happened in my chest that I can only describe as a room going quiet, not rage. Rage is loud. This was the opposite. Every sound in me shut off at once, and in the silence, one clear thought stood up. They didn't even check where she was that day. They were so sure nobody was keeping track. They were so sure nobody kept receipts. I did not say any of that. This is important. If you take one thing from this story for your own life, take this. I looked at that date, and I felt the floor of my life tilt, and I said absolutely nothing about it, because I had spent 7 years learning from the best silent operator I knew. My father, a man who never raised his voice, because he never had to, a man whose cruelty always arrived notarized. You do not tip off a man like that. You do not give him 3 years to get his story straight. You let him believe the meeting went fine. So I asked one question, and I kept my voice as flat as his. I said, "Grandma told me she'd put something in writing with her lawyer. A will. Will. Where is the will?" My father didn't blink. "There is an old will somewhere." "Sure. Doesn't matter. The house was already Dean's before she passed. A will can't give away what she didn't own anymore." And then he leaned back and he gave me the smile, and he said it. He actually said it. "I know you feel like you are owed Marnie, you were compensated. You had free room and board for 7 years. Family doesn't keep receipts. Free room and board. $504,000 of care. And I had been the one freeloading. Dean, to his credit. No, he doesn't get credit. Dean studied his coffee, like there was a message in it. My mother said, "We just want everyone to move forward." Moving forward, the official language of people who have just robbed you. I stood up. I said, "Thank you for the coffee." I am told, by the version of me that watches from the ceiling in moments like that I was frightening precisely because I was polite. And on my way out, this part I did allow myself. I walked through the kitchen, and I took the blue tin off the counter where my mother had already staged it with the things she was keeping, and I put it under my arm like a football. And I looked at her, and I said, "Grandma left this to me out loud. You can have it when you show me a deed." Nobody stopped me. It was 10:40 in the morning. I walked out of that house with a dented tin of recipe cards and 17 years of silence. Finally burned out of me. And I drove away from the only family I had. And here is the strangest thing I can tell you. I have never in my life felt more like Ruth's granddaughter than I did at that red light, with her tin on the passenger seat, belted in like a child. If you have ever walked out of a room where your whole worth was decided without you, comment the word "stayed" down below. Just that. One word. I read every one of them, and I promise you, the people typing it will understand each other on sight and stay with me, because everything you are angry about right now, I get to fix it. On the record. Stone by stone. Now, the rebuild. I am going to give you the 2 years after that morning the way they deserve to be given. Fast. Because you already know I survive. And the survival is not the interesting part. The transformation is 6 weeks after that morning, I signed a lease on half of a duplex across town. 640 square feet, a galley kitchen, and a porch the size of a bath mat. The first fixture I bought was a light for that porch. I screwed it in myself, standing on a kitchen chair, and I turned it on before I'd unpacked a single box. Some rituals you carry out of a burning building. I needed work, and here is where those 7 years paid a dividend. Nobody had noticed me collecting. All that time at Ruth's kitchen table, on the long nights when she slept in 20-minute stretches. I hadn't been watching television. I'd been studying. Before I moved in with her, I'd been a records clerk at the county. I already knew my way around deed books and index ledgers. And during the caregiving years, I'd worked through a title examination course, unit by unit, at that kitchen table, with Ruth in her clear hours drilling me from flashcards, like it was a spelling bee. Legal descriptions, easements, chains of title. She thought it was wonderful. She used to say, "Somebody in this family ought to know how paper works." You want to talk about foreshadowing. My grandmother personally trained the woman who would avenge her at her own kitchen table, and none of us knew it. 2 months after that morning, I walked into a title agency downtown, the kind of office that checks a property's history before anyone's allowed to buy it. And I asked for a job. The woman who interviewed me was named Constance, 60-something, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the calm of a person who has seen every kind of lie a document can hold. She looked at my thin resume, then at me for slightly too long. She said, 7-year gap. What were you doing? And because I was too tired to perform, I told her the truth, the whole morning, with the folder truth. Constance listened, without once making the face people make, the wince, the poor, you tilt, of the head. When I finished, she took off her glasses, and she said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. People who say family doesn't keep receipts, honey. Those are always the people holding them. Then she hired me. I started the following Monday. I am not going to walk you through 2 years of learning a trade. So here is the montage. And you can put your own music behind it. I searched titles in a windowless room until the county's index system lived behind my eyes. I found a forged release on a farm property in my 4th month and a 50-year-old boundary error in my 6th. I got licensed. I got promoted. I became the person other examiners brought the ugly files to. The ones where the paper trail bends in a way paper shouldn't bend. It turns out that 7 years of noticing everything, of tracking medications and moods, and the exact sound of a lock at night, translates perfectly into a job where the entire skill is noticing. My family had trained me to be invisible and observant. The state of Ohio now paid me for it. And Ruth's estate. It crawled. My father had gotten himself appointed executor. That is the person a court trusts to carry out a dead person's affairs. And he slow walked everything. Because slow suited him fine. The savings sat. The paperwork drifted. I didn't push. I want to be honest with you about why. It wasn't strategy yet. It was grief. And it was dread. Some part of me knew that the day I pulled that thread, I would have to follow it all the way down. And I wasn't ready. I told myself the deed could wait. Deeds don't go anywhere. That is the whole point of recording them. I saw my parents twice in those 2 years. Both times at funerals of other people. Both times. Across a room. My mother left voicemails on holidays. Bright as frosting. We don't understand why you are doing this. Sweetheart, family doesn't keep receipts. You know. Call us. I kept every voicemail. Of course, I kept them. I had become, by trade and by temperament, a keeper of records. The tin sat on my counter, in the exact spot it had held at Ruth's, left of the stove, handle facing out. Twice that first winter, I tried to bake from her cards, and failed. Her handwriting gave quantities like some and enough, and the molasses cookies came out like roof shingles. And I ate them anyway, standing over the sink, because they tasted burnt and wrong, and even so, a little bit like her kitchen. Then, 2 years and 4 months after that morning, on an ordinary Thursday at my desk, everything changed in the time it takes a coworker to say, "Hey, isn't this your old street?" She turned her monitor toward me. It was a real estate listing, fresh that morning. A house, for sale, $310,000. Charming original details, the listing said, lovingly maintained. The house on Larkspur Lane. Dean was selling it. And in the listing photo, taken at dusk, to look warm, the porch light was on. They had turned on her light to sell her house. I sat there looking at that lit porch, staged like a lie, and I felt the drawer in my mind slide all the way open at last. Somebody still keeping this place, the light said. And I thought, yes, me. You just don't know it yet. That detail, the light in the listing, did something a folder full of grievances never could. It ended the waiting. Stay with me now. This is where it turns. That Saturday morning, I did the thing I do for strangers, 40 hours a week. Except this time I did it as a private citizen, on my own hours, with my own $2. Per Pascal Giege. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters to how this ends. I never touched my employer's systems for this. I didn't have to. Property records are public. Anyone, you, right now, today, can walk into your county recorder's office and read the entire paper history of any address in America. My family committed their crime in a building with a public reading room. Think about how sure, themselves they had to be. I sat down at a public terminal in the recorder's office at 9 a.m. with a legal pad and I pulled what we call the chain of title for the house on Larkspur Lane, the list of every hand that property has ever passed through, in order, back to the beginning, and I read it like an examiner, which means slowly, and forward in time, and trusting nothing. Page 1. My grandfather buys the lot. Decades of quiet, a mortgage, and years later, its release, meaning the debt was paid in full, the house free and clear, exactly as Ruth always said. Grandfather dies. The house passes to Ruth alone, all of it clean, all of it in order, a well-kept life, told in stamps. And then, near the end of the chain, there it was, the quit claim deed. Ruth, to Dean, $10. Love and affection. I had seen the photocopy across my father's table, but this was the recorded original. And the original had things the photocopy hadn't shown me, or things I'd been too concussed by grief to read that morning. Now I read every line of it the way I'd been trained, and I am going to walk you through what I found, one page at a time, because each one raised the stakes, and I want you to feel them raise. First, the date, March 14th, 3 years before Ruth died. I already knew that date was a lie. But knowing something and proving it are different countries. And here is the thing that separated my anger from every other cheated relative's anger in every waiting room in America. I could prove where Ruth was that day, without asking anyone's permission, because I had been her healthcare proxy, her legal voice, and a proxy is entitled to the patient's records, and I had kept copies of everything from that hospitalization, in a folder, in my duplex, because keeping records was by then simply what I was. Admitted, March 12th. Discharged March 18th. 6 days as an inpatient, with physician notes on the 14th describing her condition in the plane. Devastating language doctors use. She was in a hospital bed, on medication, recovering from a stroke. The day a licensed notary swore, she stood in an office and signed a deed. Call that document what it was. The hospital dates, my grandmother's alibi, written by people with no reason to lie. Second, the notary block itself. Every notary stamp carries the notary's name and commission number. And this name, I knew. Not a stranger, a man who had golfed with my father for 20 years. I am not going to give him a name here. The state has his name, and that is the only place it needs to be. But when I saw it, the shape of the whole thing came into focus, all at once. Nobody had wheeled my grandmother anywhere. Nobody had even needed to fool a stranger. A friend had inked a stamp as a favor on a page my father put in front of him. And that stamp, the entire legal weight of which, as I personally watched her sign, was a favor between golf buddies. Third, and this is the page that broke me open. The deed had been recorded, meaning filed into the public books, on March 15th, the very next day, while Ruth was still in the hospital, while I was still sleeping, in the vinyl chair. They hadn't even waited for her to come home. I thought about my father sitting in that hospital room for his 10 minutes, saying the room smelled like a hospital, with the ink barely dry downtown. He had looked at his sleeping mother and at his exhausted daughter, and he had made small talk, knowing I photocopied everything. $2, a page, I paid cash, and the clerk at the counter, a kid, maybe 25, stamped my copies certified without knowing he was handing me a sword. And then I walked to my car, and I sat behind the wheel, in the parking garage. And that is where I cried, the only time in this entire story, and I'll tell you exactly what kind of crying it was, because it wasn't rage and it wasn't self-pity. It was the 14th of March, 3 years late. It was crying for a woman asleep in a hospital bed, while her own son took the house out from under her body. She never knew. I got to be furious on her behalf, but she never even got to know. I cried for maybe 4 minutes. Then I wiped my face with a fast food napkin from the glove box, and I opened my legal pad and at the top of a clean page, I wrote 3 words: buy the book. Because here is what I need you to understand about what happened next. And if you remember one thing from this channel, make it this: I did not need revenge. I had something so much better available to me. I had procedure. Every system my family had counted on to protect them. The stamp, the recording, the court. Every one of those systems has an immune response built into it for exactly this disease. Most people never trigger it because most people don't know it is there. I knew. Knowing it was my entire job. They forged a document into a system of record. And systems of record, friends, do not forgive. They just wait patiently, holding everything until somebody who can read shows up. Monday morning, I asked Constance for a private word, and I laid the certified copies on her desk. The $10 deed, the hospital dates. And I told her what I intended to do. I want you to notice that I did this, because it is the step people skip in stories like mine. And skipping, it is how righteous people wreck their own cases. This was personal business touching my professional world, and I wanted it disclosed. On the record, before I took a single step, Constance read for a long time. Then she looked at me over the glasses and said, "You do this on your own time, on your own dime, through the front door, with a lawyer, not one shortcut. You are not just building a case. Marnie, you are building the version of you that gets to win it." Then she slid the folder back and added, "And when it is over, you'll tell me everything. Because I have hated your father for 2 years based on one job interview. So here is exactly what I did, in the order I did it. All of it through the front door. Step 1. I hired an elder law attorney, a lawyer who specializes in exactly this, the paperwork of aging and the abuse of it. $3,500 as a retainer, which was most of what I'd saved in 2 years. Handed over without a flinch. Sitting in her office, I finally asked the question that had been under my tongue since the porch. Since I put it in writing. "Marnie, was there a will?" There was. Her own lawyer. The same man who'd sat at Ruth's kitchen table the day she made me her proxy. Still had it in his files, executed 9 years before her death, back when no doctor on earth would have questioned her mind. And it said, what she told me it said, the savings, split, among the grandchildren, small gifts, to her church, and the house on Larkspur Lane, in plain typed English, to my granddaughter Marnie, who kept it. 4 words of description, where none was legally required. Who kept it? She hadn't just left me the house. She had left me the reason, in writing, because she knew that someday somebody would need to read her intent out loud in a room full of people, pretending not to know it. Her lawyer told me one more thing that day, and this is the vindication I keep in the tin now, on a card of its own. He said that when Ruth signed that will, she asked him, twice, whether it was strong enough. His word, strong. He'd assured her it was, and she'd said, good, because they'll go around Marnie if I leave them away. 9 years ahead of them. My grandmother saw the whole crime coming 9 years before they committed it, and she built the countermeasure at her kitchen table. And then she taught the girl at that same table how paper works. Tell me again that quiet old women don't play the long game. Step 2. My attorney filed a petition in probate court. Probate being the court process that sorts out what a dead person truly owned and where it goes. Asking the court to declare the quitclaim deed void, not to punish anyone, just to declare, formally, that the paper was false, and that therefore the house had still been Ruth's on the day she died, and therefore the will, her real voice, controlled it. Attached to that petition, the certified deed, the hospital date side by side with it, and my sworn statement about the corridor, the elevators, and the folder under my father's arm on the afternoon of March 14th. Step 3. And this one was mine. And I will not pretend it wasn't satisfying. I filed a complaint with the Secretary of State's Notary Division. Notaries are commissioned by the state, and the state requires them to keep a journal, a logbook of every act, every date, every signer, checked against identification, in person. My complaint was 2 pages long and had no adjectives in it. Just the deed, the hospital dates, and one sentence inviting the state to ask its licensed witness to produce the logbook entry for March 14th. Then I went home, and I turned on my matte porch light, and I waited for the machinery to do what machinery does. It took 9 months, and I am going to give you the results the way they arrived. Flat, official, one envelope at a time, because the flatness is the point. This is what winning actually sounds like. It does not sound like shouting. It sounds like a state employee typing. Envelope 1. The Notary Division's written finding. Their investigator had requested the logbook. The logbook had no entry for March 14th. None. When interviewed, the notary, my father's golf partner of 20 years, admitted he had notarized the deed as, quote, an accommodation, without the signer present, at the request of a longtime friend. An accommodation. His commission was revoked permanently, and the file was referred to the county prosecutor, because signing a false certificate isn't a favor. It is a crime, with a statute number. Envelope 2. Faced with the state's own finding, the sale of the house collapsed. The buyer's title company, an outfit exactly like mine, doing exactly my job, flagged the deed the moment the court filing hit the index, and no title insurer in America will touch a house whose ownership is a live question. 11 days before closing, the buyers walked. $310,000 evaporated off Dean's calendar. He'd already spent some of it in his head. I know because of the boat forum posts. And no, I will not elaborate, because I don't have to. Envelope 3, the one I keep. The probate court's order. The judge heard it all. The hospital dates, the missing logbook entry, the revoked commission, the notary's own written admission, and ruled that the quitclaim deed was void from the beginning. Void ab initio. If you want the Latin in plain words, legally, it had never existed at all, which meant the house had been Ruth's on the day she died, which meant her will, the real one, the strong one, controlled, and her will said, to my granddaughter, Marnie, who kept it. One more line in that order, almost a footnote. The court removed my father as executor for cause and ordered him to file a full accounting. Every dollar of Ruth's money he'd touched in 3 years of slow walking. Itemized, under oath, with receipts. I want you to sit with that, the way I did. A judge ordered my father, of all men on this earth, to produce receipts. Now, the reckoning. Because paper is the verdict, but somebody still has to read a verdict out loud. And I had decided, months earlier, that it would be me, and that it would happen at the same table. I called my father and asked for a family meeting. I used his phrase and I used his tone, and I could hear, in the 2 seconds of silence before he said fine, that some animal part of him already knew. 10 a.m. on a Saturday, at my parents' dining table. 3 years, almost to the season. After the morning with the folder, my mother poured coffee. Nobody drank. Dean sat where Dean had sat. And this time, the manila folder came in under my arm. I had written out what I would say and rehearsed it in my car, because I knew that the moment I sat in that chair, the 7-year-old in me and the 39-year-old in me would both be present, and only one of them could be allowed to speak. I said it in numbered statements, not because I am dramatic, because numbers can't be interrupted, and I had spent a lifetime being interrupted at that table. 1. On March 14th, 3 years before Grandma died, a deed was created transferring her house to Dean. On that date, Grandma was an inpatient recovering from a stroke. Here is the deed. Here are the hospital dates. They cannot both be true, and the hospital has no reason to lie. 2. The notary who stamped that deed has admitted to the state, in writing, that Grandma was never in front of him. His commission is revoked. His file sits with the county prosecutor. Here is the state's finding. 3. The probate court has declared the deed void from the beginning. In the eyes of the law, it never existed. The house belonged to Grandma the day she died, and her will, signed 9 years before her death, when no one alive could question her mind, leaves it to me. Here is the court's order. Page 4 is the part about Dad. 4. How, Dad? You are no longer executor. The court removed you for cause. You have 60 days to account for every dollar of hers you have handled. Itemized, under oath. The court's word for what it wants, and I am quoting the order, is receipts. 5. I am not asking any of you for anything. I did not come here to negotiate, because none of this is mine to give away. It is already done. I came because 3 years ago, at this table, you handed me a piece of paper and told me not to make it a thing. I wanted you to have the same courtesy. It is a thing. Then I stood up and put on my coat and into the silence. And I want you to know I had not planned this part. Some sentences you simply earn, I said. You were right about one thing, Dad. Family doesn't keep receipts. I tapped the folder. Everyone else does. The hospital. The county. The state of Ohio. Every place Grandma and I have been for 10 years has been quietly writing it all down. You just never thought anyone would come back to read it. My mother said my name once, in the voice people use for spilled wine. Dean said nothing at all, which was the first honest thing he'd contributed in years. My father looked at the folder, and then at me, and what was in his face wasn't guilt. I want to report it accurately. It was recalculation. A man reworking a sum that had never once come out wrong before. I left before he found a number he liked. You know what happened next, because you know these people now. They escalated. People like my father always escalate, because silence from the person they've injured was the load-bearing wall of the whole house. First came the voicemails. My mother, sugar, over panic. We're old, Marnie. We won't be here forever. Is this really who you are? Then Dean, one time only, a masterpiece of self-pity. I could go to jail as if he were the weather and not the forecast. Then my father, twice. The first voicemail was a lecture about family, delivered in the announcement voice. The second, 10 days later, after his lawyer had presumably explained the accounting order to him line by line, was shorter, and it was the closest thing to begging I have ever heard from that man. He offered, I am quoting a voicemail I still possess, to make things right between us. If I would just call the court and tell them this had all been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Notarized, recorded, and listed at $310,000. I answered each of them exactly once, by text. With one sentence, I did not vary by a single word. All communication about the estate goes through my attorney, and then nothing. Do you understand what nothing does to people like this? Screaming they can survive. Screaming means you are still at the table. Nothing means the table is gone. My mother sent a 4-page letter at Christmas. I know it was 4 pages from the envelope's weight, with 0 apologies in it. I know that too. because my attorney read it so I didn't have to, and her summary was 5 words long. They want it to stop. It didn't stop. It concluded. There is a difference. The accounting my father filed showed he had paid himself executor's fees while the estate crawled, and the court made him give them back. $11,000. With interest, the prosecutor let his golf partner plead to a reduced charge. The man kept his freedom and lost the thing that mattered more in his circles, which was his story about himself and around town, because certified documents are public, and small towns read. The version of events my parents had been telling for 3 years quietly reversed itself. The way a tide goes out, without one word from me. I never posted anything. I never had to. I had simply made the truth easier to look up than the lie. If you are still with me, and if you've ever had to learn the hard way that silence plus paperwork beats screaming every single time, do me one favor before the ending. Share this one with the person you know who stayed. Every family has one. Most of them think nobody sees them. Let this be the video that says, "We see you, and there are more of us than there are of them." So here is where it all landed. And I warn you now, this ending is quiet. If you came for a car speeding away from an explosion, this channel has never once been that, and neither has justice. On a Thursday in October, the county recorder indexed a new instrument against the property on Larkspur Lane, the deed carrying out Ruth's will, conveying the house to me. I took the morning off and filed it myself, in person, at the same public counter, where I had once paid $2 a page to learn the truth. The clerk brought the stamp down. At 10:40 in the morning, I checked the time on purpose. 3 years earlier, at 10:40 in the morning, I had walked out of my father's dining room, carrying a tin of recipes and nothing else. Now, the record showed what the record had always deserved to show. Same hour. Different woman. I did not move back into the house right away. I'll be honest with you about why. I was afraid it would feel like a museum, or worse, like a courtroom. For 2 weekends, I just went over and cleaned it, room by room, the way I used to, and let it decide what it was going to be. And on the second Sunday, standing in her kitchen with the afternoon light coming through, I set the blue tin back down on the counter, left of the stove, handle facing out, and the house made up its mind. And so did I. That evening, before I'd moved in a single stick of furniture, I turned on the porch light. It is on right now. As I record this, it has not gone dark one night since. And here is what I finally understood. That first evening, watching it come on, I had spent years thinking that light was for the people who might come back. It was never for them. A lit porch tells the street, somebody's still keeping this place. The light was always about the keeper. Ruth knew that. It just took me the whole story to catch up. I don't speak to my parents. I want to be plain about that, because this is the part where other stories go soft. And I refuse to lie to you. There was no reunion. There is no reunion coming. My mother still sends cards. My attorney still opens them. The count of apologies remains 0. And forgiveness without an apology is just a return address for the next robbery. My father and I have not exchanged a word since the voicemail. I answered, with one sentence. I hear he tells people, I was always difficult. He is right. In a way, I turned out to be extraordinarily difficult to erase. But one thread came out of the wreckage, and I am going to give it to you, because it is true, not because it is tidy. Dean's daughter, my niece, Poppy, who is 11, and who did not choose her father any more than I chose mine, asked her mother if she could visit the house where the cookies came from. She meant Ruth's. Kids, remember? Kitchens. She comes one Saturday, a month now. We bake from the tin, and we fail exactly the way I used to fail, because her great-grandmother wrote some and enough, and expected you to have been paying attention. Last month, Poppy pulled out the card for the molasses cookies and taped to the back of it, in handwriting I would know underwater, was a smaller card I had somehow never turned over in all these years. It said, "For the one who stays in the kitchen long enough to find this. That is how you know it is yours." I had to walk to the sink for a minute. It wasn't crying. I'd used my one cry in a parking garage, and I stand by the allocation. It was just Ruth being Ruth. One last time. Even the tin had a will in it. Even the tin knew who kept it. So, that is the story. They wrote her signature while she slept, and they told me not to make it a thing. And they really believed, that paper only works for the people at the head of the table. And the whole time, the girl doing the dishes was learning to read. The house on Larkspur Lane is warm. The savings Ruth left her grandchildren went out exactly as her will directed. Dean's share, too, because her voice controlled that money, not my anger. And I will not edit a dead woman. The blue tin sits left of the stove. On the 14th of March, every year, I take the day off, and I don't mourn. I bake, badly, on purpose. And I set 2 cups of coffee on the counter, and I drink mine slowly, and I let hers go cold. And it is somehow the least sad ritual I own. Family doesn't keep receipts. That is what he always said. And I've decided he was almost right. Family doesn't keep receipts. Family keeps recipes. It keeps porch lights. It keeps a chair warm, and a kettle on, and a kid company, at a kitchen table, at 2 in the morning. The receipts were never supposed to be our job. That is what the county was for. That is what the state was for. That is what I am for. 40 hours a week, for strangers who will never know my name. The woman at the title agency, who reads every page all the way to the end. Because once, somebody counted on nobody reading. If this story found you in your own long middle, still in the house, still doing the dishes, still being told, what you are owed is nothing. Hear me. Keep your records. Keep them boring, and dated, and complete. Not out of spite. Out of respect for the day, and it is coming, when the truth will need to be easier to look up than the lie. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be cruel. You just have to be the one who kept it. Comment stayed if that is you, so the others can find you. Subscribe if you want to be here, when the next quiet person gets loud on paper. And wherever you are tonight, go turn on the porch light. Not for whoever left, for the keeper. It was always for the keeper.